The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the sterile corridors of Fort Meridian, casting harsh shadows that seemed to follow Maria Santos wherever she pushed her cleaning cart. At 0500 hours, when most of the base was still wrapped in sleep, she was already 3 hours into her shift, methodically working her way through the administrative buildings with the quiet efficiency that had made her invisible to everyone who mattered. The wheels of her cart squeaked against the polished linoleum, a rhythmic sound that had become the soundtrack to her anonymity. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maria paused outside the briefing room where tomorrow's mission. Parameters were displayed on a large tactical screen. Through the glass, she could see the satellite imagery of hostile territory, the red zones marking enemy positions, the green corridors indicating safe passage routes. Her eyes automatically began calculating angles, wind patterns, and sight lines before she caught herself and looked away. That part of her life was supposed to be dead and buried, filed away in classified folders that bore someone else's name. The morning sun was beginning to filter through the reinforced windows as she moved to the officers' quarters, her gray uniform blending seamlessly with the institutional walls. Colonel Martinez, the base commander, emerged from his office carrying a steaming cup of coffee and barely glanced in her direction as he passed. To him, she was just part of the background, another piece of equipment that kept the base functioning smoothly. The irony wasn't lost on her that the man whose life she'd once saved in Kandahar now walked past her every morning without the slightest recognition. The cleaning supplies rattled softly in their designated compartments as Maria navigated the maze of corridors that had become her domain over the past 4 years. Each building held its own personality, its own secrets that she'd absorbed through countless hours of silent observation. The communications center with its banks of monitors displaying global intelligence feeds. The armory where weapons were meticulously maintained and catalogued. The medical facility where wounded soldiers recovered from missions she could only guess at. She knew every corner, every blind spot, every security camera placement better than most of the soldiers stationed here. Captain David Chun stepped out of the tactical planning room, his pressed uniform crisp despite the early hour. He was young, ambitious, and had the kind of confidence that came from never having been truly tested in combat. His eyes swept over Maria as if she were a shadow, dismissing her presence with the casual indifference reserved for the help. She'd seen that look countless times before, from officers who had no idea that the woman mopping their floors had once held the same rank, had once commanded respect in rooms, just like the ones she now cleaned. "Santos," Chun called out without bothering to turn around fully. "There's coffee spilled in the strategy room. Make sure it's cleaned up before the morning briefing." His tone carried the automatic authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Without question, Maria nodded silently and adjusted her route, adding another task to her mental checklist. It was easier this way, she'd learned. Easier to be invisible, to let them see only what they expected to see. The strategy room was empty when she entered, the large conference table scattered with classified documents that she carefully worked around. The spilled coffee had already begun to stain the mahogany surface, and she worked quickly to clean it before the damage became permanent. As she wiped down the table, her eyes inadvertently caught sight of a reconnaissance report detailing increased enemy activity in the northern sectors. The intelligence was 3 days old, she noted automatically, and the patrol patterns shown in the attached maps left significant gaps in coverage that any competent sniper could exploit. She finished cleaning and was preparing to leave when voices approached from the hallway. Maria quickly busied herself with organizing the cleaning supplies as Captain Chen entered with 2 other officers, Lieutenant Sarah Walsh and Major Robert Hayes. They barely acknowledged her presence as they spread out additional maps and began discussing the morning's briefing agenda. The perimeter security review shows were adequately covered, Hayes was saying, his finger tracing the base. Boundaries on a detailed schematic. Standard patrol rotations, motion sensors, and the guard towers provide overlapping fields of fire. He spoke with the confidence of someone who had never been on the receiving end of a well-planned assault. Maria continued her work, moving slowly to avoid drawing attention while listening to their conversation. The security assessment they were discussing was fundamentally flawed, she realized. The guard towers created blind spots that could be exploited by anyone with proper training. And the patrol schedules were too predictable. A determined enemy force could punch through their defenses with minimal effort if they knew what to look for. What about the intelligence reports regarding increased hostilities? Walsh asked, shuffling through a stack of papers. Command is concerned about the possibility of a coordinated attack on our forward operating bases. Her voice carried a note of concern that the others seemed to dismiss. Chun waved his hand dismissively. Routine posturing. These militants don't have the capability or coordination for a significant assault on a fortified position like this. Our defensive positions are more than adequate for anything they might attempt. His certainty was the kind that came from textbook knowledge rather than field experience. Maria finished organizing her supplies and prepared to leave, but Hayes's next comment stopped her cold. The latest satellite imagery shows movement in the northern valleys, but intelligence assesses it as seasonal migration patterns rather than tactical positioning. He pointed to several locations on the map that Maria could see clearly from her position near the door. The locations he was indicating were classic staging areas for a multi-pronged assault. The terrain provided natural concealment. The elevation offered commanding views of the base approaches, and the distances were perfect for long-range engagement. What the intelligence assessment had dismissed as innocent movement was actually textbook positioning for a coordinated attack. Maria's training kicked in automatically, her mind mapping fields of fire, calculating angles of approach, and identifying the most likely positions for enemy snipers and support weapons. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She wanted to speak up, to point out the obvious tactical errors in their assessment, but she knew exactly what would happen. They would look at her with the same dismissive indifference they always did, see only a janitor with delusions of military knowledge, and dismiss her concerns as the foolish observations of someone who didn't understand real warfare. She'd learned that lesson the hard way 4 years ago when she'd tried to maintain her identity, tried to hold onto the respect she'd earned through blood and sacrifice. The memory of that humiliation still burned. She'd been Sergeant Maria Santos. Then, just returned from her third deployment in Afghanistan, where she'd logged over 40 confirmed kills as a designated marksman. Her unit had been disbanded due to budget cuts, and she'd been reassigned to Fort Meridian for administrative duties while awaiting her next assignment. The adjustment to garrison life had been difficult, but she'd maintained her training regimen, kept her skills sharp, and prepared for her next deployment. Then came the incident that changed everything. During a routine training exercise, she'd noticed critical flaws in the base's defensive preparations. The mock assault scenario was being run with predictable patterns that would never fool a real enemy, and the designated sniper positions were poorly chosen, offering limited fields of fire and no escape routes. When she'd pointed out these issues to the exercise commander, Major Thomas Bradley, he'd initially dismissed her concerns as overthinking. But Maria had persisted, providing detailed analysis of the tactical errors and suggesting improvements based on her combat experience. Bradley had grown increasingly irritated with her input, especially when her suggestions proved correct during the exercise debrief. The mock enemy force had exploited exactly the weaknesses she'd identified, penetrating the base defenses with embarrassing ease. Rather than acknowledging her expertise, Bradley had written a scathing evaluation questioning her attitude and team cohesion. He'd recommended her for reassignment to duties more suited to her temperament, military speak for being shuffled away from anything important. The recommendation had carried weight because Bradley was a decorated officer with political connections, while Maria was just another sergeant without advocates in the command structure. When the reassignments came down, Maria found herself transferred to base services with a notation in her file about attitude problems and difficulty accepting authority. Her security clearance was maintained but effectively neutered, her combat experience dismissed as irrelevant to her new role. She'd fought the assignment initially, filing appeals and requesting reviews, but the bureaucratic machinery had already made its decision. Eventually, she'd stopped fighting and accepted her fate as part of the invisible infrastructure that kept the base running. Now 4 years later, she listened to officers make the same kinds of tactical errors that had nearly gotten her unit killed in Afghanistan, and she said nothing. The cost of speaking up had been too high, the lessons of institutional indifference too painful to ignore. Instead, she finished her cleaning and left the room, taking with her the knowledge that Fort Meridian was far more vulnerable than its defenders realized. The rest of her morning routine passed in familiar patterns. She cleaned the communications center while overnight operators monitored global intelligence feeds, absorbing fragments of conversation about increased chatter in militant networks. She mopped the medical facility while doctors discussed preparations for potential mass casualty events. She emptied trash bins in the armory while technicians performed maintenance on weapons she knew better than they did. By noon, when her shift officially ended, Maria had collected a comprehensive picture of the base's defensive posture, its intelligence assessments, and its state of readiness. The picture was not encouraging. Fort Meridian was preparing for threats that existed only in outdated tactical manuals, while ignoring the real dangers that her experience told her were building just beyond the perimeter. She made her way to the base commissary for lunch, carrying her tray to a table in the corner where she could observe without being observed. The cafeteria buzzed with conversation from soldiers discussing training exercises, upcoming deployments, and the routine concerns of military life. At the officers' table, Captain Chen was holding court with his usual group, their voices carrying over the general din. The morning briefing confirmed what we already knew, Chen was saying between bites of his sandwich. Command is satisfied with our defensive preparations. The base is secure, our intelligence is solid, and our response protocols are adequate for any realistic threat scenario. His companions nodded agreement, their confidence fed by reports that told them what they wanted to hear rather than what they needed to know. Lieutenant Walsh looked less convinced than the others. I still think we should consider additional patrols in the northern sectors. The intelligence reports may be dismissing the activity, but something about it doesn't feel right. Her instincts were better than her colleagues, Maria noted, but she lacked the experience to articulate why the situation felt wrong. Major Hayes cut off her concerns with practiced authority. Walsh, you're overthinking this. Intelligence assessment is clear, and our defensive positions are more than adequate. Sometimes the simplest explanation is the correct one. His dismissal was final, the kind that discouraged further discussion and reinforced the dangerous groupthink that Maria had seen lead to disasters in combat. Maria finished her lunch and prepared to leave when she overheard Captain Chen making a comment that made her blood run cold. Besides, even if there were some kind of coordinated assault, they'd have to get past our perimeter security first. Good luck hitting anything significant from the ranges they'd be limited to. His laughter was shared by the others, but Maria knew exactly how wrong he was. The ranges he was dismissing as ineffective were well within the capability of any competent marksman with proper equipment. From the elevated positions in the northern valleys, a skilled sniper could engage targets throughout the base with devastating accuracy. The command building, the communication center, the armory, Even the officers' quarters were all vulnerable to long-range fire from positions that the current security assessment had dismissed as too distant to matter. As she walked back to the base services building, Maria's mind was already working through the tactical possibilities. If she were planning an assault on Fort Meridian, she knew exactly how she would do it. A small team of skilled marksmen positioned in the northern valleys could cripple the base's ability to respond to a larger assault. Take out the communications equipment, eliminate key personnel, suppress the guard towers, and create enough chaos to allow a larger force to breach the perimeter. The base services building was quiet in the afternoon, most of the cleaning staff having finished their shifts hours earlier. Maria headed to the small office she shared with 3 other janitors and sat at the battered desk to complete her daily reports. The paperwork was routine supplies used, areas cleaned, but she filled it out with the same precision she'd once applied to mission briefings. Her supervisor, Carl Rodriguez, poked his head in as she finished. A retired master sergeant turned civilian manager, he was one of the few on base who noticed the people working for him. "How was the morning shift, Santos?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Routine," Maria said. Technically true, though it didn't reflect the unease she felt about base security. Rodriguez studied her face like someone used to reading soldiers. "You look troubled. Something bothering you?" His concern was genuine. He didn't know about her military background, but she suspected he'd picked up on details others missed. "Just thinking about security," she said. "Some of the conversations I overhear make me wonder if we're as prepared as we think." Rodriguez nodded. "The most dangerous enemy is the one you're not expecting. Places like this get comfortable, start believing their own security assessments without questioning the assumptions." His words carried the weight of experience. "What would you do if there was a real threat and no one was listening?" Maria asked. "Depends on the threat and who's ignoring it. Sometimes all you can do is make sure you're personally ready. You can't save everyone, but you can save yourself and maybe a few others." Practical advice from someone who knew institutional limits. Maria nodded and finished the reports. His words stayed with her as she left the base. She couldn't change its security posture, but she could prepare. That evening, she drove to her off-base storage unit past the bars, surplus shops, and restaurants catering to soldiers toward a nondescript industrial area on the edge of town. Unit 247 looked like every other, but behind its metal door was a carefully organized arsenal. Weapons, optics, ammunition, and gear were arranged with military precision, all regularly maintained. At the center was her customized rifle built for her in Afghanistan, chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum with a high-end scope and suppressor. Accurate beyond 1,200 meters in skilled hands. She ran her fingers over it, muscle memory guiding a thorough inspection. It was more than a weapon, it was a connection to who she had been. She spent the next hour checking ammo, testing gear, and ensuring readiness. It was ritual part discipline, part preservation of self. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, Maria locked the unit and drove back to the base. Tomorrow would bring another shift of cleaning halls and emptying trash, another day of being invisible while others made decisions that could cost lives. But tonight, she remembered what it meant to be a soldier. Back on base, the guard towers were manned. Patrols walked their routes, and sensors scanned for threats. On paper, Fort Meridian was secure, but Maria knew better. The guards were watching for textbook threats, following procedures written by officers who'd never been hunted. The sensors were calibrated to detect predictable intrusions, not the subtle moves of a skilled adversary. Crossing the parade ground, Maria looked to the northern mountains. Intelligence had flagged seasonal migration patterns there. She saw only shadows, but her instincts told her that somewhere in the dark, patient eyes might already be watching Fort Meridian. calculating angles and planning an assault that would test every weakness the base refused to acknowledge. The thought should have frightened her, but instead it filled her with a strange sense of anticipation. For 4 years, she'd been forced to pretend that her skills and experience didn't matter, that she was nothing more than invisible help whose opinions carried no weight. But if her fears proved correct, if Fort Meridian really was facing a threat that its defenders couldn't recognize, then perhaps the time would come when being invisible would become her greatest advantage. Maria entered her quarters and began preparing for another night of restless sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring another day of watching and waiting. But now she was watching and waiting for something specific, something that her training told her was coming whether the base's defenders believed it or not. And when it came, she would be ready to prove that some skills never rust, some training never fades, and some soldiers never really stop being soldiers, no matter what uniform they wear or what job they've been assigned. The alarm clock beside her bed showed 2,300 hours when she finally turned off the lights. In 6 hours, she would begin another shift as the invisible janitor who cleaned the corridors of Fort Meridian. But tonight, for the first time in 4 years, she fell asleep as Sergeant Maria Santos, sniper, and the woman who might be the only thing standing between the base and a disaster that nobody else saw coming. The emergency klaxon pierced the pre-dawn darkness at 0347 hours, its urgent wail cutting through the relative quiet of Fort Meridian like a blade through silk. Maria jolted awake in her narrow bunk, instantly alert despite having been in deep sleep moments before. Her body responded with the automatic reflexes of someone whose survival had once depended on the ability to transition from rest to combat. Readiness in seconds. The alarm pattern was one she recognized from her active duty days. 3 long blasts followed by 2 short ones, the signal for imminent hostile contact. Emergency lighting flooded the corridors as personnel threw out. The base responded to the alarm, their footsteps echoing against concrete walls as soldiers rushed to their assigned positions. Maria pulled on her gray custodial uniform, the mundane clothing feeling strange against skin that remembered the weight of combat gear. Through her small window, she could see figures moving with practiced urgency across the parade ground, their weapons gleaming dully in the artificial light. The base intercom crackled to life with the controlled voice of the duty officer. All personnel to defensive positions. This is not a drill. Perimeter sensors have detected multiple contacts approaching from the north and east. Estimated time to contact, 15 minutes. Communications with command has been lost. All section leaders report to your assigned positions immediately. Maria felt her pulse quicken, not with fear, but with the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with confirmed enemy contact. Her mind automatically began processing the tactical situation based on the limited information provided. Multiple contacts from 2 directions suggested a coordinated assault, exactly the kind of sophisticated attack that the base's defenders had dismissed as beyond enemy capability. The loss of communications indicated either equipment failure or deliberate jamming, neither of which boded well for the base's ability to coordinate its defense. She stepped into the corridor and was immediately swept up in the flow of personnel moving toward their battle stations. Soldiers hurried past her with the focused intensity of men and women preparing for combat, their training taking over as they shed the comfortable routines of garrison life. But Maria could see the uncertainty in their movements, the subtle signs of troops who had drilled for this moment, but never experienced the reality of coordinated enemy assault. Captain Chun appeared at the far end of the corridor, shouting orders to a group of junior officers. His pressed uniform was already showing signs of stress, dark patches of sweat visible under the harsh emergency lighting. Secure all classified materials and establish communication with the perimeter guards, he called out, his voice carrying a note of strain that hadn't been there during the confident discussions of the previous day. Maria made her way toward the base services building, officially her assigned position during emergency situations, but her route took her past the communications center, where she could observe the developing situation. Through the reinforced windows, she could see technicians working frantically at their equipment, their faces illuminated by the glow of multiple screens displaying tactical information. Inside the communications center, Lieutenant Walsh was coordinating with the perimeter guards, her voice tight with controlled tension as she tried to re-establish contact with units that had gone silent. Tower 6, this is base communications. Please respond. Tower 6, do you copy? The radio crackled with static, empty of the acknowledgement she was desperately seeking. Major Hayes stood behind her, studying the tactical display that showed the last known positions of the base's defensive elements. Red indicators marked the locations where contact had been lost, creating gaps in the defensive perimeter that were growing larger with each passing minute. How many towers are we unable to contact? He asked, his earlier confidence replaced by the grim realization that the situation was developing beyond their expectations. 3 towers on the northern perimeter and 2 on the eastern approach. Walsh replied, her fingers flying over the communication controls as she attempted to reach the silent positions. The last transmission from Tower 6 reported movement in the valley, approximately 800 meters out. That was 4 minutes ago. Maria continued past the communications center, but the information she'd gathered painted a clear picture of what was happening. The enemy assault was proceeding exactly as her training told her it would, with skilled marksmen systematically eliminating the base's observation posts before the main attack commenced. The ranges Walsh had mentioned, 800 meters, were well within the effective engagement distance for competent snipers using proper equipment. The base services building was nearly empty when she arrived, most of the civilian staff having been evacuated to the designated shelters according to emergency protocols. Carl Rodriguez was waiting for her, his face grim with the expression of someone who had seen enough combat to recognize when a situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Santos, you need to get to the shelter with the other non-essential personnel," he said, but his tone lacked conviction, as if he sensed that the traditional categories of essential and non-essential might not apply to their current circumstances. "This looks like it's going to be more serious than the usual border skirmishes." Maria nodded but made no move toward the designated shelter areas. "What's the latest assessment from command?" she asked, genuinely curious about how the base leadership was interpreting the developing assault. Rodriguez consulted a handheld radio that was tuned to the emergency frequency. "Official word is that we're dealing with a coordinated probe, probably designed to test our response capabilities," he replied, but his expression suggested he didn't entirely believe the official assessment. Estimated enemy strength is between 20 and 30 hostiles, armed with small arms and possibly some crew-served weapons. The assessment was dangerously optimistic, Maria realized. A force of 20 to 30 militants wouldn't have the capability to systematically eliminate guard towers from extended range while coordinating multi-directional approaches. The enemy force they were facing was likely larger, better equipped, and far more sophisticated than the base leadership was willing to acknowledge. An explosion echoed across the base, its concussion rattling the windows of the services building and sending vibrations through the concrete foundation. The sound was followed by the distinctive crack of high-velocity rifle fire, individual shots spaced with the deliberate precision of accurate long-range engagement. Maria's training allowed her to distinguish between the various sounds of combat, and what she was hearing confirmed her worst fears about the base's vulnerability. Rodriguez's radio crackled with an urgent transmission from the base command center. "All defensive positions, we have confirmed hostile contact at multiple points along the perimeter. Enemy forces are employing precision fire from concealed positions. Casualty reports are coming in from Towers 4, 6, and 8, medical teams. Are requested at grid reference 347. The mention of precision fire from concealed positions told Maria everything she needed to know about what Fort Meridian was really facing. This wasn't a probe or a border skirmish conducted by local militants with aging equipment. The base was under assault by a professional military unit that included skilled marksmen capable of accurate fire at extended range. The systematic elimination of the guard towers was classic sniper doctrine, designed to blind the defenders before the main assault commenced. "Rodriguez," Maria said, her voice carrying the tone of authority that surprised both of them. "The official assessment is wrong. What we're facing isn't a probe, it's the opening phase of a coordinated assault by a professional military unit. Those precision shots you're hearing are coming from positions that our perimeter security never anticipated. And the casualty reports from the towers mean we're about to lose our ability to observe and coordinate defensive fire." Rodriguez studied her face with growing surprise. "You sound like you know something about this kind of warfare," he said slowly. "More than most civilians would pick up from watching the news." His tone was questioning but not accusatory, the response of someone who had learned to trust his instincts about people. Before Maria could respond, another series of explosions echoed across the base, closer this time, and followed by the sustained crack of automatic weapons fire. The distinctive sound of incoming mortar whistled overhead, their impact sending geysers of dirt and debris skyward as they walked across the parade ground. The enemy had moved beyond the elimination phase and was beginning the suppression phase of their assault. The radio in Rodriguez's hand erupted with multiple overlapping transmissions as the base's defensive positions came under coordinated attack. "Base Command, this is Alpha Section. We're taking heavy fire from the northern ridgeline. Request immediate artillery support." "Command, Bravo Section reporting. We have multiple casualties and need medical evacuation." All units. The eastern gate is under assault by approximately 15 hostiles with crew-served weapons." Maria listened to the radio traffic with the practiced ear of someone who had coordinated similar defensive actions in Afghanistan. The enemy was following textbook assault doctrine, using suppressive fire to pin down the defenders, while assault teams moved against specific objectives. The base's response was reactive rather than coordinated, with individual sections calling for support rather than implementing a unified defensive strategy. "Rodriguez, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Maria said, her voice cutting through the chaos of radio transmissions and distant explosions. "The base's defensive plan is based on the assumption that we're facing local militants with limited capabilities. What's actually happening is a professional military assault that's proceeding according to doctrine that most of our defenders have never encountered." She pointed toward the north, where the sustained crack of sniper fire continued to echo across the base. "Those positions in the northern ridgeline, the ones that intelligence dismissed as too far away to matter, they're providing overwatch for the assault teams while systematically eliminating our observation capabilities. Every guard tower that goes silent reduces our ability to coordinate defensive fire and creates blind spots that the assault teams can exploit." Rodriguez was staring at her with growing amazement. "Santos, how do you know all this? You talk like someone who's been on both sides of this kind of fight." His question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that Maria had spent 4 years avoiding. The sound of approaching helicopters drew their attention to the windows, where they could see the distinctive silhouettes of attack aircraft moving toward the base from the south. For a moment, Maria felt a surge of relief, thinking that air support had arrived to assist with the defense. But as the aircraft drew closer, her trained eye picked up details that made her blood run cold. The helicopters weren't flying in the tight formation typical of friendly air support. Their approach angle was wrong for aircraft intending to assist. The base defense and the weapon systems visible on their external hardpoints were oriented toward the base rather than away from it. These weren't rescue aircraft, they were part of the enemy assault force. "Get down," Maria shouted, tackling Rodriguez to the floor just as the lead helicopter opened fire with its chin-mounted cannon. The building shuddered under the impact of 30mm rounds that punched through the walls like they were made of paper, filling the air with concrete dust and metal fragments. The attack continued for several seconds before the aircraft moved on to other targets, leaving behind a scene of devastation. Rodriguez lay beneath her, his eyes wide with shock and something that might have been recognition. Jesus Christ, Santos, you moved like a soldier. Not someone who's read about combat or watched it on TV, but someone who's been there. His voice was steady despite the circumstances, the tone of someone putting pieces together. Maria helped him to his feet, brushing concrete dust from her custodial uniform while her mind raced through the tactical implications of helicopter-borne assault forces. The enemy wasn't just conducting a ground assault. They were employing combined arms tactics that included air support. The sophistication of the attack was far beyond anything that local militant groups could organize or execute. Rodriguez, we need to get out of this building, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life-or-death decisions under fire. This location will be targeted again, and the structure won't survive another direct hit from those cannons. She moved toward the emergency equipment locker, her hands finding the combat first aid kit and portable radio with automatic efficiency. Where are we going? Rodriguez asked, following her lead despite the confusion that was clearly written across his face. The designated shelters are in the basement levels of the main administration building. His suggestion was logical based on the official emergency protocols, but Maria knew that those protocols were designed for different kinds of threats. The shelters are death traps if the enemy knows the base layout, Maria replied, slinging the first aid kit over her shoulder while adjusting the radio to the tactical frequency. Professional assault forces always target command and control facilities first, and the administration building is an obvious choice for housing key personnel during an emergency. She led him toward the rear exit of the services building, moving with the careful precision of someone who understood that survival often depended on avoiding predictable routes. Through the windows, they could see the base defense unfolding in real time, with individual sections fighting desperate actions against an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. The northern perimeter was completely dark now, all of the guard towers having been systematically eliminated by the enemy marksmen. Muzzle flashes sparked from concealed positions in the ridgeline, each flash representing accurate fire directed at defenders who were struggling to identify targets they couldn't see. The enemy snipers were employing classic techniques, firing from positions that offered excellent fields of fire while remaining concealed from return fire. In the distance, Maria could see assault teams moving against the eastern gate, their movements coordinated with the suppressive fire being provided by the snipers. The gate's defenders were pinned down by accurate long-range fire, unable to maintain effective resistance against the approaching assault teams. It was a textbook example of combined arms assault that was proceeding exactly according to plan. Rodriguez, Maria said as they reached the rear exit, I need to tell you something that I should have mentioned 4 years ago. My name is Sergeant Maria Santos, former designated marksman with the 75th Ranger Regiment. I've been assigned to janitorial duties for the past 4 years due to a bureaucratic dispute, but my training and experience are current and relevant to what's happening right now. Rodriguez stared at her for a long moment, his expression cycling through surprise, understanding, and something that might have been respect. That explains a lot about how you carry yourself, he said finally. And it means you might be the most qualified person on this base to assess what we're really facing. Maria nodded grimly. What we're facing is a professional military assault conducted by a force that includes skilled marksmen, coordinated assault teams, and air support. The base's defensive plan is inadequate because it was designed for a different kind of threat. Our perimeter security has been compromised. Our observation capabilities have been eliminated, and our command structure is about to be targeted by enemy air assets. Another wave of helicopters approached from the east, this time flying in tight formation toward the base command center. Maria counted 6 aircraft, enough to deliver a significant assault force directly into the heart of the base's defensive structure. The implications were terrifying, particularly given that most of the base's key personnel would be gathered in the command center trying to coordinate the defense. "We need to get to higher ground," Maria said, studying the tactical situation with the practiced eye of someone who had planned similar operations from both sides. "The enemy is about to take the command center, which means the base defense is going to collapse into individual units fighting without coordination. If we're going to make a difference, we need a position that offers observation of the entire battle space." Rodriguez followed her gaze to the water tower that dominated the center of the base, its elevated platform offering a commanding view of the entire facility and the surrounding terrain. "That tower will be exposed to enemy fire," he pointed out, his concern evident in his voice. "Everything is exposed to enemy fire right now," Maria replied. "The difference is that from up there, we can see what's happening and potentially do something about it." She checked the portable radio, confirming that it was receiving transmissions from the various defensive positions around the base. The radio crackled with increasingly desperate transmissions as the base defense began to crumble under the coordinated assault. "Command, this is Delta Section. We're being overrun at the motor pool, requesting immediate reinforcement. All units, the armory is under direct assault. Heavy casualties reported. Medical, we need evacuation at grid 445, multiple wounded." Maria listened to the transmissions with growing frustration. The defenders were fighting bravely, but they were reacting to enemy initiatives rather than seizing the initiative themselves. Without coordinated leadership and accurate intelligence about enemy positions, individual units were being defeated in detail by a force that maintained tactical coordination. "Rodriguez, I'm going to ask you to do something that's going to sound crazy," Maria said, her decision crystallizing as she watched the base defense disintegrate around them. "I need you to help me get to that water tower, and then I need you to trust me to do something that might help turn this situation around." Rodriguez studied her face for a long moment, seeing something there that convinced him to trust her judgment, despite the apparent impossibility of the situation. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice steady with the resolve of someone who had decided to follow a leader he trusted. "I need you to help me retrieve equipment from a storage unit in town," Maria replied, knowing that her words would require explanation but lacking the time for detailed discussion. "Equipment that officially doesn't exist, and skills that officially don't matter, but which might be the only thing that can save this base." The sound of helicopters landing near the command center punctuated her words, followed by the sustained rattle of automatic weapons fire as enemy assault teams disembarked and began their attack on the base's nerve center. Time was running out for Fort Meridian, and Maria knew that conventional defensive measures were no longer sufficient to prevent a complete tactical disaster. Rodriguez looked at her with the expression of someone who had made a decision that would change everything. "Let's go get your equipment, Sergeant," he said, using her military rank for the first time. "And then let's see what a real soldier can do when the chips are down." Maria felt a surge of emotion that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the recognition that she was finally being seen for who she truly was. For 4 years, she had been invisible, dismissed, and overlooked. But now, as Fort Meridian faced its darkest hour, someone was finally willing to trust her expertise and follow her lead. The base's defensive perimeter was collapsing. Its command structure was under direct assault, and enemy forces were advancing on multiple fronts. By any conventional assessment, the situation was hopeless. But Maria Santos had never been interested in conventional assessments, and she had skills that the enemy couldn't anticipate because they didn't know she existed. As they prepared to leave the relative safety of the services building, Maria took one last look at the tactical situation developing around them. The enemy had planned well and executed their assault with professional competence, but they had made one critical error in their intelligence assessment. They had dismissed the base's custodial staff as irrelevant to the tactical situation, never suspecting that among the invisible janitors was a soldier whose skills were about to change everything. The water tower stood silhouetted against the smoke-filled sky, its elevated platform offering the kind of commanding view that a skilled marksman could use to devastating effect. Between here and there lay 20 minutes of chaos, confusion, and enemy fire. But Maria had navigated worse situations in Afghanistan, and tonight she would prove that some soldiers never really stop being soldiers, regardless of what uniform they wear or what job they've been assigned. Rodriguez was waiting for her signal, his face set with the determination of someone who had decided to trust a leader whose qualifications he was only beginning to understand. In the distance, the battle for Fort Meridian continued to rage, with individual acts of courage being overwhelmed by superior enemy coordination and firepower. But that was about to change, because the invisible janitor was about to become visible, in ways that the enemy would never forget. The storage facility seemed impossibly far from Fort Meridian as Rodriguez drove through the darkened streets, his knuckles white against the steering wheel while explosions lit up the horizon behind them. Maria sat in the passenger seat, her mind racing through tactical calculations and equipment requirements, while the sound of distant gunfire provided a grim soundtrack to their desperate mission. Every second they spent away from the base was another second that soldiers were dying while an enemy force systematically dismantled the defensive structure that was supposed to protect them. Rodriguez had asked no questions when Maria had given him the address of the storage facility, but she could see the uncertainty in his eyes as they drove through the industrial district. The concept of a janitor maintaining a private arsenal was difficult to accept, even for someone with his military background. But the evidence of her expertise had been mounting throughout the night, from her tactical assessments to her instinctive reactions under fire, and he had chosen to trust her judgment despite the apparent impossibility of the situation. The storage facility was deserted at this hour, its security lighting casting long shadows between the rows of identical metal buildings. Maria led Rodriguez directly to Unit 247, her fingers working the combination lock with practiced efficiency, while her ears remained tuned to the sounds of battle echoing from the direction of the base. The metal door rolled up to reveal the carefully organized arsenal that represented 4 years of clandestine preparation for a moment exactly like this one. Rodriguez stepped into the storage unit and stopped dead, his eyes widening as he took in the professional quality of the equipment arrayed before him. Weapons, ammunition, optics, and specialized gear were arranged with military precision on custom-built shelving, everything meticulously maintained and ready for immediate use. This wasn't the hobby collection of an enthusiast. It was the operational arsenal of a professional soldier who had never stopped preparing for war. "Jesus Christ, Santos," he whispered, running his fingers along the stock of the customized rifle that occupied the place of honor in the collection. "This is serious equipment. Military grade, professionally maintained, and configured for someone who knows exactly what they're doing with it." His voice carried a mixture of awe and growing understanding about who Maria really was. Maria was already moving with purpose through the equipment, selecting items with the automatic efficiency of someone who had performed this ritual countless times in preparation for combat operations. The rifle came first, its familiar weight settling into her hands like a reunion with an old friend. She performed a rapid but thorough inspection of the weapon's condition, checking the action, examining the optics, and confirming that everything was exactly as she had left it during her last maintenance session. The ammunition came next, match-grade rounds that had been hand-loaded to precise specifications for optimal accuracy at extended range. She selected enough cartridges for sustained engagement, knowing that once the shooting started, she would have no opportunity to return for resupply. Each round represented the potential to save lives or eliminate threats, and she treated them with the respect that such responsibility demanded. Specialized equipment followed in rapid succession. A range finder for precise distance measurement, a ballistic computer for calculating complex shots, and a communication headset that would allow her to coordinate with any remaining defensive positions. She selected camouflage appropriate for the terrain around Fort Meridian, clothing that would allow her to blend seamlessly with the natural environment while maintaining freedom of movement. "Rodriguez, I need you to understand something," Maria said as she continued her preparations, her voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. "What I'm about to do isn't sanctioned by any official authority, and it's going to put both of us at significant personal risk. If you want to find a safe place to wait this out, I'll understand completely." Rodriguez shook his head firmly, his expression set with the determination of someone who had made an irrevocable decision. "I signed up to serve this country, and that didn't end when I retired from active duty. If you can help save the base, then I'm going to help you do it." His commitment was absolute, spoken with the conviction of someone who understood the stakes involved. Maria nodded gratefully and continued her equipment selection, adding items that would be essential for a lone operator working behind enemy lines. Night vision equipment, emergency medical supplies, and backup communication devices joined the growing pile of gear that would transform her from invisible janitor to lethal combatant. Every item had been carefully chosen based on lessons learned during 3 deployments in Afghanistan, knowledge purchased with blood and applied with deadly precision. The final addition to her equipment was a ghillie suit, a camouflage garment that would render her virtually invisible to enemy observation. The suit had been custom-tailored to her physical dimensions and designed specifically for the terrain around Fort Meridian. Wearing it, she would become part of the landscape itself, able to move undetected through areas where conventional soldiers would be spotted immediately. As she finished her preparations, Maria could hear the sound of heavy weapons fire coming from the direction of the base, sustained bursts that suggested the enemy assault was entering its final phase. The defenders were running out of time, ammunition, and options, while a professional military force systematically eliminated their ability to resist. Every moment of delay increased the likelihood that her intervention would come too late to affect the outcome. "We need to get back to the base immediately," Maria said, securing the last of her equipment in a tactical backpack designed for rapid deployment. "The enemy is following classic assault doctrine, which means they'll try to secure the command center and eliminate key personnel before consolidating their gains. If we're going to disrupt their operation, we need to do it before they complete the first phase of their assault." Rodriguez helped her load the equipment into his vehicle, his movements quick and efficient despite his obvious amazement at the transformation he was witnessing. The woman who had cleaned floors and emptied trash bins for 4 years was revealing herself to be a professional warrior whose capabilities exceeded those of most active-duty soldiers. The incongruity was striking, but the evidence was undeniable. The drive back to Fort Meridian took them through streets that were now completely deserted, the local population having either fled or taken shelter when the sounds of battle had begun. Emergency vehicles could be heard in the distance, their sirens adding to the cacophony of warfare that was consuming the military installation. Through the windshield, they could see that several buildings on the base were now burning, their flames casting an orange glow against the smoke-filled sky. As they approached the base perimeter, Maria directed Rodriguez to park near a section of the fence that was outside the main defensive positions, but offered concealed access to the surrounding terrain. This was the beginning of her operational area, the space where she would transition from transported passenger to active combatant. The transformation was both physical and psychological, as she shed the last vestiges of her civilian identity and embraced the soldier she had never stopped being. Rodriguez, from this point forward, you need to maintain radio contact with me, but stay well clear of the operational area, Maria said as she changed into her combat gear, her movements quick and professional. What I'm about to do requires complete freedom of movement, and I can't be concerned about civilian safety while engaging enemy targets. Rodriguez nodded his understanding, but his concern was evident in his voice when he spoke. Santos, you're talking about taking on a professional military unit single-handed. Even with your skills and equipment, the odds are overwhelmingly against you. His concern was well-founded, based on a realistic assessment of the tactical situation. Maria finished donning her ghillie suit and checked her equipment one final time, every item positioned for immediate access under combat conditions. The odds would be overwhelming if they knew I was coming, she replied, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had survived similar situations through skill and determination. But they don't know I exist, which means I have the advantage of complete tactical surprise. She slipped through the fence with practiced ease, her movements silent and efficient as she entered the terrain that would become her hunting ground. The ghillie suit immediately began working its camouflage magic, breaking up her human outline and allowing her to blend seamlessly with the natural vegetation. Within moments of entering the operational area, she had become invisible to conventional observation. The base was approximately 2 kilometers away across rolling terrain that offered numerous concealed positions for a skilled marksman. Maria moved through this landscape with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to read ground like a map, identifying every fold and feature that could provide cover or concealment. Her training had taught her to think like both hunter and hunted, to see the terrain as a three-dimensional puzzle that could be solved with patience and expertise. The sounds of battle grew louder as she approached the base perimeter, individual weapon signatures becoming distinct as she drew closer to the action. Her trained ear could distinguish between friendly and enemy fire, picking out the distinctive sound patterns that indicated different types of weapons and ammunition. The intelligence she gathered through auditory observation added crucial details to her understanding of the tactical situation. Through her night vision equipment, Maria could see the full scope of the enemy operation for the first time. Professional military units were operating with textbook precision, their movements coordinated and their positions carefully chosen to maximize tactical advantage. Sniper teams occupied elevated positions in the northern ridgeline, providing overwatch for assault teams that were systematically reducing the base's defensive positions. The enemy force was larger than the official estimates had suggested, numbering at least 60 combatants organized into specialized teams with specific mission assignments. Heavy weapons teams were providing suppressive fire while assault teams advanced on predetermined objectives. Command and control elements were coordinating the entire operation through sophisticated communication equipment that allowed real-time tactical adjustments. But Maria also saw something that the enemy couldn't possibly anticipate. Their positions, carefully chosen for maximum effectiveness against conventional defensive measures, were vulnerable to attack from directions they hadn't considered. The sniper teams occupying the ridgeline had excellent fields of fire toward the base, but their positions were exposed to flanking fire from the elevated terrain to their west. Maria began her approach to the optimal firing position, moving with the patient deliberation of someone who understood that haste could be fatal in this environment. Every step was calculated to minimize noise and avoid detection, her body flowing through the terrain like water finding its natural course. The ghillie suit rendered her invisible to the night vision equipment that the enemy was undoubtedly using to maintain situational awareness. The firing position she had identified was a rocky outcropping approximately 800 meters from the enemy sniper positions, elevated enough to provide clear lines of sight while offering natural concealment and multiple escape routes. The position had been burned into her memory during countless hours of terrain study, identified as optimal for exactly this type of engagement. As she settled into the firing position, Maria felt the familiar calm that came with the transition. From movement to engagement, her breathing slowed and deepened, her heart rate stabilized, and her mind entered the focused state that had made her one of the most effective designated marksmen in her unit. The rifle became an extension of her body, its weight and balance as familiar as her own limbs. Through her scope, she could see the enemy sniper teams with crystal clarity, their positions revealed by the muzzle flashes that accompanied each shot toward the base. Professional soldiers, well-equipped and expertly positioned, but vulnerable because they had no reason to expect attack from their flanks. They were focused entirely on their assigned targets, maintaining the kind of tunnel vision that could be exploited by someone with Maria's training and position. She selected her first target, a sniper team operating from a position that commanded the base's northern approach. 2 men, one serving as the primary shooter while the other acted as spotter and security. They were approximately 820 meters away, well within her effective engagement range given the quality of her equipment and the favorable environmental conditions. Maria began her shooting sequence, a ritual that had been refined through countless hours of training and combat experience. Range estimation, wind calculation, ballistic compensation, and target prioritization flowed together in a seamless process that transformed complex mathematics into instinctive action. Her finger found the trigger with the light touch that separated expert marksmen from merely competent shooters. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder with familiar authority, the suppressor reducing both the sound signature and muzzle flash while maintaining ballistic performance. Through her scope, she watched the target fall as the bullet found its mark with surgical precision. The spotter turned in confusion, trying to locate the source of the shot that had eliminated his partner, but Maria's position remained invisible to his searching gaze. The second shot followed within moments, eliminating the spotter before he could alert other enemy positions to the threat emerging from their flank. 2 professional soldiers, eliminated in rapid succession by someone they never saw coming. The enemy sniper team that had been terrorizing the base's defenders ceased to exist, their position now silent and abandoned. Maria shifted her aim to the second sniper team, located approximately 900 meters away on a different section of the ridgeline. The increased range required more precise calculations, but the fundamentals remained the same. Identify, calculate, engage, confirm. Each shot was a mathematical problem solved through training and experience, each solution measured in lives saved rather than targets eliminated. The base's radio frequency crackled in her earpiece as defensive positions began reporting a change in their tactical situation. Command, this is Bravo Section. The sniper fire from the northern ridge has stopped. We're no longer taking accurate long-range fire from that position. The relief in the voice was palpable, spoken by someone who had been pinned down by accurate enemy fire for far too long. But Maria knew that her intervention, while effective, was only the beginning of what needed to be accomplished. The enemy assault teams were still advancing on their objectives, supported by heavy weapons and coordinated through professional command and control. Eliminating the sniper teams had removed one threat, but the primary assault was still proceeding according to plan. She repositioned herself to engage the heavy weapons teams that were providing suppressive fire for the advancing assault units. These positions were more heavily defended and occupied by larger numbers of enemy soldiers, requiring different tactics and accepting higher levels of personal risk. But the mathematical logic remained the same. Eliminate key targets to disrupt enemy coordination and create opportunities for the defenders to regain the initiative. The first heavy weapons position was anchored around a crew-served machine gun that was systematically suppressing the base's eastern defensive positions. Maria could see through her scope that the position was occupied by at least 4 soldiers, with the machine gunner and his assistant gunner being the highest priority. Targets. Eliminating them would silence the weapon and potentially create confusion among the remaining crew members. She engaged the machine gunner first, her shot precisely placed to ensure immediate incapacitation while minimizing the risk of return. Fire. The weapon fell silent as its operator slumped over the gun, creating a momentary pause in the suppressive fire that had been pinning down the Eastern defenders. The assistant gunner moved to take over the weapon, but Maria's second shot eliminated him before he could resume firing. The remaining crew members scattered from the position, abandoning their heavy weapon in the face of accurate fire from an invisible enemy. Without the suppressive fire from the machine gun, the Eastern defensive positions were able to engage the assault teams that had been advancing under its protection. The tactical balance began to shift as the defenders regained the ability to coordinate their fire. Maria continued her systematic elimination of enemy positions, moving with practiced efficiency through targets that presented the greatest threat to the base's defense. Mortar crews, command elements, and specialized teams fell to precisely placed shots that disrupted enemy coordination and created cascading failures in their assault plan. Each engagement was calculated for maximum tactical effect, designed to multiply the impact of her intervention beyond the simple mathematics of targets eliminated. The enemy force began to show signs of confusion as their carefully planned assault encountered unexpected resistance from an invisible opponent. Radio intercepts revealed growing concern about the source of the accurate fire that was systematically eliminating key personnel and positions. Orders were issued to locate and eliminate the unknown sniper, but Maria's position and movement patterns made her effectively invisible to conventional counter-sniper tactics. Through her scope, she could see assault teams beginning to withdraw from their advanced positions, their confidence shaken by the loss of supporting fires and key personnel. The momentum of the attack was shifting as professional soldiers found themselves engaged by an opponent they couldn't locate or predict. The psychological impact of facing an invisible enemy was adding to the tactical damage created by her precise shooting. But Maria knew that her most challenging target still awaited engagement. The enemy command element was positioned in a heavily defended location, approximately 1,200 meters from her current position, protected by multiple security teams and positioned to maintain command and control over the entire assault. Eliminating the command element would decapitate the enemy operation, but it would require the most difficult shot of her career under the most challenging conditions. She began moving toward a new firing position that would provide the range and angle necessary to engage the command element. The movement required crossing open ground while avoiding detection by enemy security teams that were now actively searching for her position. The ghillie suit and her movement techniques would be tested to their limits as she navigated through an increasingly hostile environment. The new firing position was a natural hide site that offered concealment while providing the elevation necessary for the extended range shot. Maria settled into the position with methodical precision, her equipment arranged for optimal performance under challenging conditions. The shot she was about to attempt pushed the boundaries of what was possible with her equipment, requiring perfect calculation and flawless execution. Through her scope, she could see the enemy command element conducting their operation from what appeared to be a mobile command post. Multiple antennae identified it as the nerve center of the enemy operation, while the presence of senior personnel was confirmed by their distinctive equipment and positioning. Eliminating the command element would create a leadership vacuum that could cause the entire assault to collapse. Maria began her final shooting sequence, calculating variables that included extended range, challenging environmental conditions, and the time-sensitive nature of her target. The mathematics were complex, but her training provided the framework for solving problems that existed at the intersection of physics and warfare. Every factor was considered, every variable accounted for, every calculation verified, before she committed to the shot. The rifle spoke with authority across the distance that separated her from the enemy command element, its bullet carrying with it the accumulated expertise of a soldier who had never stopped being a soldier. Through her scope, she watched as the command post erupted in confusion, key personnel eliminated and equipment damaged by the precisely placed shot that announced her presence at extended range. Radio intercepts confirmed the success of her engagement as enemy units began reporting loss of communication with their command element. Without central coordination, individual teams began operating independently, their tactical cohesion degrading. As the assault plan collapsed into uncoordinated actions, the professional military operation was transforming into a series of disconnected engagements that favored the defending force. Maria began her withdrawal from the firing position, moving with the same careful precision that had characterized her entire operation. The enemy would undoubtedly attempt to locate and engage her position, but her understanding of the terrain and her movement techniques would allow her to evade detection while continuing to influence the tactical situation. As she moved through the darkness toward her next position, Maria could hear the sounds of battle changing around her. The sustained, coordinated fire that had characterized the enemy assault was giving way to sporadic engagements as individual units found themselves isolated and under pressure from re-energized defenders. The base's radio frequency carried increasingly positive reports as defensive positions reported successful engagements with enemy forces that were no longer operating under unified command. The transformation was remarkable to witness, a textbook example of how the elimination of key targets could create cascading effects that multiplied far beyond the immediate tactical impact. Professional soldiers who had been conducting a coordinated assault were now fighting as disconnected units without the support and coordination that had made them effective. But Maria knew that her mission was not yet complete. Enemy forces remained in contact with base defenders, and wounded soldiers on both sides required medical attention that could only be provided safely once the immediate threat was eliminated. She had disrupted the enemy assault and shifted the tactical balance. But the final phase of the engagement would require her to transition from invisible sniper to visible leader. She made her way toward the base perimeter, using concealed routes that would allow her to re-enter the facility without being engaged by friendly forces who might mistake her for an enemy combatant. The ghillie suit would be abandoned in favor of clothing that would identify her as friendly to the defenders who were still engaged in scattered firefights throughout the base. The eastern gate was her point of entry, chosen because it was far from the heaviest fighting and offered the best opportunity to make contact with friendly forces without creating confusion about her identity. As she approached the gate, Maria could see that the immediate area was secure, with defenders in defensive positions but not under direct fire. She identified herself to the gate guards using proper military protocols, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to operating in combat environments. Friendly approaching from the east, "I'm Sergeant Maria Santos, and I have intelligence about enemy positions that is critical for completing the base defense." The guards recognized her as the base janitor, but her professional demeanor and obvious military equipment created confusion about her actual identity and role. "Santos, you're supposed to be in the emergency shelters with the other civilian personnel. What are you doing out here with military equipment?" The question was posed by a young corporal who was clearly struggling to reconcile her familiar face with her current appearance. "Corporal, I need to speak with the senior officer present immediately," Maria replied, her tone leaving no room for discussion. "I have actionable intelligence about enemy positions and capabilities that needs to be passed to whoever is coordinating the base defense." Her urgency was evident, spoken by someone who understood that time was critical in combat operations. The corporal directed her toward the temporary command post that had been established in the motor pool after the main command center had come under direct assault. As she made her way through the base, Maria could see the evidence of the battle that had been raging for the past several hours. Buildings showed damage from direct fire, equipment was scattered from hasty defensive preparations, and wounded soldiers were being treated by medical personnel working under combat conditions. The temporary command post was organized chaos, with officers trying to coordinate defensive operations while dealing with degraded communications and incomplete intelligence about enemy positions. Major Hayes was directing operations from behind. A makeshift barricade, his earlier confidence replaced by the grim determination of someone fighting for survival. "Major Hayes," Maria called out as she approached the command post, her voice cutting through the noise of radio transmissions and shouted orders. "I'm Sergeant Maria Santos, and I have critical intelligence about the enemy assault that you need to hear immediately." Hayes looked up from the tactical map he had been studying, his face registering confusion as he recognized the base janitor, dressed in military gear and carrying professional equipment. "Santos, what the hell are you doing here?" "You're supposed to be in the emergency shelters." His response was automatic, based on his understanding of her official role rather than her actual capabilities. "Sir, for the past 2 hours I've been engaging enemy positions from concealed locations outside the base perimeter," Maria replied, her tone professional and direct. "I've eliminated multiple sniper teams, heavy weapons crews, and the enemy command element. The assault force has lost tactical cohesion and is operating without central coordination." The command post fell silent as officers processed her words, trying to reconcile the familiar figure of the base janitor with the claim she was making about single-handedly disrupting a professional military assault. The incongruity was so complete that several officers exchanged glances that suggested they thought she might be suffering from combat stress. "Santos, I appreciate your desire to help, but this is a combat situation that requires professional military personnel," Hayes said, his tone patronizing in the way that dismissed civilian contributions to military operations. "The best thing you can do is return to the emergency shelters and let us handle the tactical situation." Maria felt the familiar frustration of being dismissed by people who refuse to see beyond their preconceptions, but this time the stakes were too high to accept institutional indifference. "Major, 30 minutes ago your eastern defensive positions were pinned down by accurate machine gun fire that was preventing them from engaging advancing assault teams. That fire stopped when I eliminated the crew-served weapons position from an overwatch position 800 meters to the north." She pointed to the tactical map, indicating locations with the precision of someone who had personally observed and engaged enemy positions. 40 minutes ago, your northern perimeter was under constant sniper fire from 3 separate teams positioned on the ridgeline. That fire stopped when I eliminated all 3 teams from flanking positions that they hadn't anticipated." Hayes studied the map, his expression growing more serious as he considered her words. The timing she was describing corresponded exactly with reports his units had been providing about changes in enemy fire patterns. "Even if what you're saying is true, there's no way a single person could have eliminated that many professional soldiers," he said, but his certainty was beginning to waver. "Sir, I'm a trained designated marksman with 3 combat deployments and over 40 confirmed kills in Afghanistan," Maria replied, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone stating facts rather than making claims. "I've been assigned to janitorial duties for the past 4 years due to a bureaucratic dispute, but my training and experience are current and relevant to this situation." Lieutenant Walsh, who had been monitoring radio communications, looked up from her equipment with an expression of growing understanding. "Major, the pattern of enemy position elimination does correspond exactly with what she's describing. The timing, the locations, the sequence of events, all of it matches our tactical observations." Hayes examined the tactical map more carefully, correlating the information Maria had provided with the reports his units had been submitting throughout the night. The correlation was perfect, supporting her claims with objective evidence that was difficult to dismiss. Santos, assuming what you're telling us is accurate, what's your assessment of the current tactical situation? Maria moved to the map, her finger tracing enemy positions and movement patterns with the confidence of someone who had observed them directly. The enemy assault force has lost tactical cohesion following the elimination of their command element. Individual teams are operating independently without central coordination or support. Your defensive positions can regain the initiative by conducting coordinated counterattacks against isolated enemy units. She indicated specific locations where enemy forces remained in contact with base defenders. These positions are vulnerable to flanking attacks because they're no longer receiving suppressive fire from the heavy weapons teams that I eliminated. A coordinated advance by your reserve forces could roll up their remaining positions and force a general withdrawal. Hayes studied her tactical assessment, recognizing the professional quality of her analysis despite his continued amazement at its source. "What would you recommend as our immediate course of action?" he asked, his tone now carrying the respect that one professional soldier accorded to another. "Organize your reserve forces for immediate counterattack operations," Maria replied. Without hesitation, hit their remaining positions simultaneously, from multiple directions while they're still disorganized from the loss of their command structure. They're professional soldiers, so they'll attempt to conduct an organized withdrawal once they realize their assault has failed. She pointed to specific terrain features that would support the recommended tactics. Use these natural corridors to approach their positions while maintaining coordination between your attacking units. The key is speed and simultaneous pressure that prevents them from organizing defensive positions during their withdrawal. Hayes began issuing orders to his subordinate commanders, his confidence restored by having a clear tactical plan that was based on accurate intelligence. The defensive mindset that had characterized the base's response was giving way to aggressive action designed to exploit enemy vulnerabilities. All units, prepare for coordinated counterattack operations. Detailed orders to follow. As the base defense transitioned from reactive to proactive operations, Maria prepared to return to her operational area to provide overwatch for the advancing friendly forces. Her role was shifting from lone operator to integrated support, using her position and capabilities to enhance the effectiveness of conventional military units. "Major, I'll be providing sniper support for your advancing units from concealed positions," she informed Hayes, her professional demeanor now fully accepted by the command staff. "I'll maintain radio contact and engage targets of opportunity that threaten the success of your counterattack operations." Hayes nodded his approval, his earlier skepticism completely replaced by respect for her demonstrated capabilities. "Roger that, Sergeant. Your support has been instrumental in turning this situation around. Continue mission and keep us informed of your observations." Maria left the command post and made her way back toward the perimeter, but this time she moved as a recognized member of the tactical team, rather than an invisible janitor whose contributions were dismissed. The transformation was complete, not just in her role but in how others perceived her capabilities and value. The counterattack proceeded exactly as she had predicted, with organized enemy resistance collapsing under coordinated pressure from multiple directions. Individual enemy units attempted to conduct fighting withdrawals, but without central coordination and supporting fires, their efforts were overwhelmed by the advancing defenders. From her overwatch position, Maria provided precision fire that eliminated key targets and disrupted enemy attempts to organize defensive positions. Her shots were carefully coordinated with the advancing friendly forces, each engagement designed to enhance their effectiveness while minimizing their risk. As dawn broke over Fort Meridian, the last of the enemy forces were withdrawing from the immediate area, their professional assault having been defeated by a combination of determined resistance and tactical innovation. The base remained in friendly hands, its personnel and facilities preserved through the actions of soldiers who had risen to meet an unexpected challenge. Maria watched the sunrise from her overwatch position, her rifle silent now that the immediate threat had passed. The base was secure, the enemy had been defeated, and she had proven that some skills never rust, some training never fades, and some soldiers never really stop being soldiers. As she prepared to return to the base, Maria reflected on the events of the night that had transformed her from invisible janitor to visible warrior. 4 years of dismissal and overlooked expertise had been vindicated in a single night of combat, proving that true worth isn't determined by official recognition, but by the willingness to act when action is needed most. The radio crackled with Major Hayes's voice calling for her immediate return to the command post. "Sergeant Santos, report to the command post immediately. Command wants a full debrief of your actions tonight, and there are some people here who want to thank you personally." Maria smiled as she began her movement back toward the base, knowing that her days as an invisible janitor were finally over. She had found her way back to being the soldier she had always been, through a night of fire and determination that had proven her worth beyond any possible doubt. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.